My name is Hannah, and this is my year of less stuff. Hey y'all, welcome to my second in a row single product review. I have two products that I've been testing out for over a week at this point and that I'm now sitting down to film the reviews for. I'm filming the reviews on the same day and the other one will have already gone up yesterday. So it was a review of the Becca Ignite Liquid Highlight in the shade Love, and that is what's on my cheeks and my shoulders today. If you have any curiosity about that, then that's what it is. And also you can go watch that entire review, which I actually recommend watching if you're interested in that product at all, because it did not turn out to be what I expected it to be. Also, if you saw that video, you will know that my bangs and I are having a disagreement today. We have different worldviews. I feel like bangs should behave and they feel like bangs should go in any direction that bangs choose. But the show must go on. I'm really excited to be reviewing the RÓEN 1111 Quad. I resisted it for a while because my default when something comes out is to be like, I don't need that. And I don't need it. I mean, I didn't get it for myself. I got it for review, and one of the questions I'll be answering is the question of whether, knowing what I know now, I would spend my own budget on it. I'll be answering that question at the end. But I especially feel that way when I already have something and another version of it comes out. I'm the opposite of a completionist. I like to have just the one that suits me the best and not to collect them all. So this had a bunch of strikes against it when it first came out. Also, when it first came out, the pictures were very confusing, I felt. The advertising was a little bit misleading. It looked very, very pale and icy in some pictures. Really looked like an icy pink palette. And then it looked really rich and ruddy in other pictures, even slightly like brownish in some pictures. And I was like, I don't know what's going on. My initial impression was that it was a very pale, icy palette, and I definitely didn't want that. Then when I started seeing the other pictures and seeing the dimension and the colors and seeing Amanda's review, I watched Amanda Z review this palette and demo it on her eyes. And then I started getting floods of requests from you guys to review it. You were like, please review it, please review it, please swatch it next to the other palettes. My sense has been from your messages that color-wise, this one is the one that has interested the most people so far. And that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, I could probably give a crack review about this product. I have the other two palettes. I can compare swatches. I can compare formulas. That is what I'm here to do. I have all the questions. I'm going to answer them for you. Let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video. Okay, so I wrote a list of questions that were the questions that I had before this product arrived to me, before I got it in my hot little hands. And I also tried to include the questions that I thought other people would have. Some of the questions are semi-answered for me already, given that I'm very familiar with the RÓEN formula because I have the other two quads and I love them. And I'm already partway through using them to absolute pieces. So I had some familiarity with the formulas and I assumed that these were pretty much the same formulas, although there were some surprises, as you will find out. So question number one, what are the colors like in person compared to the promo photos? This was a pressing question because this is one of those chameleon palettes. It looks so different in different pictures and in different lights. And now that I have it, I see why that is the case, because it really does, especially when I was holding it up and trying to get good close-up footage of it to insert into this video. And I will be inserting my close-up footage, my swatch footage, and my application footage for the look that I have in my eyes right now as we're going through the video. I could see that at different angles it ends up looking really different, and I had to make sure to angle it in a bunch of different ways so that you could kind of get the whole picture. It's to the detriment of a palette in advertising, but it's to the benefit of a palette in practice, because dimensional texture, that's what we're buying when we buy from RÓEN, right? So in person, I've kind of just answered it. The colors are as chameleon as they are in the promo photos, but I definitely feel like if it's a question of is it that icy pale quad or is it that rich deep quad, it's more the second thing, especially so there's one sort of icy one, which is the very textured pale sort of nudie pink in the upper corner. The other three shadows are much, much deeper than I thought that they initially were. And I will right now insert the footage that I think is the most emblematic of this. We can see it the best, which is the one where all four of my fingers have the shadows on them and I'm holding them really up close to the camera. You can see that these pinks down here, which from this distance in the monitor, they look very pale. They just look like blah, pale pinks. When you dig into the creams in the pan and you swatch them, they are red and ruddy and rich. And I like that. I'm glad that that was the answer to this question. I just realized that my brain short-circuited and I answered the first question before going on and telling you the other questions. I'm gonna whiz through the other questions really fast because I think that it's good going into the video to know which questions I'm going to address so you know what to look forward to, and then I'll come back and answer all the questions in order. That was what I was supposed to do, but I accidentally went ahead and answered the first question. Okay, so the second question is, what are the different textures among the present shadows? So in the other quads, pretty much each shade has a slightly different texture. It's not like they just took one formula and they made it different colors. There are also different textures. So I was kind of curious to know what the textures would be like in these colors. How does it apply to the eyes? This is something I already knew the answer to, given that I expected this to be the same formula. And even though they're all slightly different textures, I kind of knew the answer to this, but it's something that I'll answer for you guys. How does it look on my skin tone? How would it look on others? This I did not know at all because I had a hard time telling from the promo photos if this would be like really pale and icy on me or if I would be able to get some depth out of it. So that's something that I'll talk about. Does it set down or stay creamy? How long does the look wear? This is also something that I already knew, and if you've seen me talk about these before or seen me put them on before, you will know, but I'll go over it in the review. What's the value for money, estimated cost per use? This is hard with something like eyeshadow. They tend to just last and last and last, but I'll do my best to address it because it is a bit of a pricey quad. I mean, especially for just 4, it's a pretty pricey product. Are the textures the same as the other quads? Are there any dupes among the quads? How does it compare to the others? So is it redundant to have this one if you already get the other 2? Is there a color in this one that is like way better than anything you find in the other 2? Just the question of sort of like looking at all 3 of them together and talking about them together. And then the big question, would I personally buy this RÓEN quad with my budget? I want to talk about whether I would buy it with my budget given that I have the other 2, whether I would buy it with my budget if I didn't have the other 2, if I didn't have any of them, which one would I buy? Ranking them in the order of the one I like the most, the one I like the least, etc. Okay, so I already answered the first question. I just couldn't help myself. I already answered the first question about the promo photos. Like the picture on Sephora, this is what I think. The picture on the Sephora website, it's like, oh, it looks so pale and washed out. But I understand why it looks like that because when you look at the shades straight on in the pan, they kind of look like that. But the way that they look when they're swatched is the way that they look in the picture that RÓEN released on their Instagram on the day that it launched, which is like really rich and vibrant. And I'm so glad, as I said before. What are the different textures among the present shadows? Okay, this is so interesting. In the original quad, in the original 2 quads, the warm and the cool, which they launched first, I purchased the warm quad with my budget a while ago, and I did a like unboxing and wear test and first impressions video about that with very close-up applications. So if you're interested in the first quad, I'll of course link that video down below. I would recommend watching that one as well. And also it will tell you some things about the experience of playing with these for the first time and the experience of applying them to the eyes that this video won't tell you because this one is focused on answering these questions. So I found when I started playing with that and then when I received the cool quad as a gift from my friend Zane, that the different shades are different. So in the warm quad, which I've used quite a lot of, there are 2 browns that are pretty similar to each other. One's a little bit more cool and one's a little bit more kind of bronzy. And the cool toned one is it has more matte pigment and a little bit less shimmer, and the shimmer is more finely milled. The bronze one is a little bit flakier and has a little bit more texture. And then the gold one, the light colored one in this shade, is incredibly textured. It's like the most textured of all. It's very, very flaky and the micas are big. So it just makes like a more reflective surface on the skin when you apply it. And then the red one, it is like the most matte of all. It has reflex in it. It's still shiny, but they're the most finely milled of all of them. It's mostly just like a close to matte cream pigment. So there's really a lot of dynamics in terms of the textures in that one. And then the same is true of the cool toned one. The lightest shade and the sort of taupe are both pretty flaky. I think the lightest one is the flakiest one. And then the purple shade is extremely near matte, like the red shade in the other one. And then the gunmetal one is kind of in between. So there's a lot of texture variety. And I was kind of curious about how the chips would fall with this one. So I think that the shade in this palette that has the most near matte formula, so the shade that's the most like the purple shade in the cool palette and the orange shade in the warm palette, is this one called Rosie that's down in the corner. I believe it's named after Rosie Huntington Whiteley. It's a more peachy pink. And it's very shiny. I feel funny calling it near matte. What I mean is that it just doesn't have that chunky textured reflectiveness, and it feels like the base pigment is more saturated. The micas are much more finely milled, so you get a really even application, a really even swatch that's quite shiny and very pigmented in terms of its color. The other pink, which is a slightly more berry toned pink, it's the one that I used for the base of my look today. It has some more texture, but an equal amount, as far as I can tell, I feel like it has some more texture, but it has an equal amount of like rich saturation in the base color. Both of those shades pack a punch in terms of pigment. They're not sheer washes of color on the eye. You really can get like a thick layer of color with them. And then Hashtag, which is such a pretty color. This might be one of my favorite shades across all three palettes. It's like a taupey grayish, but I feel like it must have some lavendery and some rainbow like reflections in it. The micas are kind of dimensional and it buffs out to be sort of rainbowy and just like a very sophisticated sealy gray. It's one of those colors that you want to say it's cool toned, but then every time you're about to say that, you look at it and it just looks like a little bit warm in some lights and you just can't bring yourself to say that it's cool toned. And it's in a sophisticated smoky neutral. I love that for all over the lids. It was a really close call between putting that all over my lids today and putting these like pinks and this really reflective color. I went with the pinks because I think that the look that you get all over the lids with this deeper shade is more similar to looks that you can get from the other palettes. As you'll see when I swatch them all next to each other, there's nothing like this in the other two palettes, so I'm not saying it's a dupe. It's just that like a deep, sultry, smoky, metallic kind of eye, I get that all the time with the other two quads, whereas these warm, rosy shades aren't present in the other quad. So I went with the type of look that is a little bit more novel in this quad. So that shade I feel like has, yet again, slightly more texture than the other two. We're kind of going, as I tell you about them, in ascending order of texture. Finishing with this one, which I think is called Situation, that's in the top corner. And just like the other two quads, the lightest shade is the one that's the most textured. But, and I haven't read this anywhere, and so I might be wrong, and maybe it's hearsay, but I feel like this light, like blushy pink, I feel like it's the disco eye formula. It's got that super flaky, like incredibly flaky feel. And it applies to the eye in flakes. Like it does not apply smoothly to the eye. You rub your finger into it, you get it all gooey, you get it all nice. And when you swatch it, it applies in like patchy flakes. And the place where the thickest amount is smeared the hardest, you get this insane wet shine. And then there are places where it's pretty much just bare skin because the flaking mica has like smeared unevenly onto the skin. I love that look on the eye. I love using a shadow like that to tap on my brow bone and to get that like textured and super wet reflective look on the brow bone and all the way down the eye. In the demo, you'll see that I went back with this over almost the entire eye look after I was finished and tapped and tapped and smeared, and it made it look uber wet, like super reflective and wet. This is the most textured and the most wet looking shade across all of the palettes. The flakier or the more textured light colored shades in the other two palettes don't come close to this one in terms of flakiness. It's the most intense and the most textured. It's more like my one disco eye than it is like any of the other shades in the quads. So I don't know if they just turned up the flake on it or if they actually used the disco eye formula, but that was the biggest surprise for me about this palette. I love texture and I love dynamics. So I was really excited that this one was delivering me something in terms of texture and wet look shine that the other ones don't deliver. Also, this is like my nude. This really flaky color, really flaky wet look color is my nude more than the flaky colors in the other quads. So the warm quad, it's gold. It's like an almost yellow gold. And that shows up as gold on me because I'm so pale. And in the cool quad, it is a little bit more of a pink, but it's not as flaky. In the cool quad, the pale pink, which has a little bit more orange in it than the pink in 1111, it's much creamier. It doesn't have that insane like disco ball reflective flake. So this is just to say that that one shadow is really precious to me. Like I'm really excited that I have that because I feel like I can do things with it that I wasn't able to do with the shadows in the other two quads. Oh my gosh, we're still on question 2. Question 2 was, what are the different textures among the present shadows? Wow. Okay, how does it apply to the eyes? All right, roll footage. I will show you now the footage of me applying these shadows to my eyes. I went in with the one called Chow, which is the more berry toned. It's not exactly berry toned, but it's just berry toned when compared to the one called Rosy. I think this is a very, very pretty color. It's a really pretty all over the lid color. And it applies just like the other RÓEN shadows. You have to dig into the pan to kind of break the seal. You get a nice warmed up, gooey bunch of product on your finger, and then you start smearing it onto your eyes. It sticks very beautifully because it is so creamy and those micas are so grippy. And I like to pat it around all over my lids and then blend it out with like a small, dense, domed brush to get a nice soft edge. So you'll see me in the footage applying it, layering it, and also applying a little bit of the darker shade hashtag, the one that's that like gray gunmetal. I think it would look beautiful. I mean, I know that it looks beautiful all over the lids because I have worn it that way over the past week or so a couple of times, but it also works to deepen the outer corner with this quad, which is really nice. I think that the balance of light and dark is very elegant in this little palette. So I applied it in the outer corner. And I think that that would have been a perfectly good go-to look. You can put one of these shadows all over the mobile lid, buff it out into the crease and above the crease a little bit, and then go. I think that that's like a great standard all over the lid look. And with a more buffed out application, it's less likely to crease because the more you buff it, the more you set it, the more you kind of push it into the skin of the lid, and the more thin the application is, the more it's just gonna like stick in its layer. I love that super creamy layered look. So I then went back, as you'll see, with the super shiny shade, which is very thick and full of creamy micas, and I tapped it all over my brow bone. I tapped it all over the inner part of the look, just leaving that outer corner a little bit darker for dimension. And it made the look wet. And that was what I wanted to show you. That was why I went so ham with that shade today, because that insane wet look shine, even though the other RÓEN quads have this amazing sophisticated creamy sparkle and that sparkle blends beautifully with the colors and I absolutely love them to bits, that sheen where it just looks like my eyes have been glazed, that's new to this quad. And it's a combination of the texture and the color of this pale shade situation. So I wanted to make sure to demonstrate that for you today. How does it look on my skin tone? How would it look on others? I do think that one of the things that I really like about situations specifically in this quad is that it's very close to my skin tone. So when I use it in that way, it looks like a reflect like on my skin. Like it looks wet on my skin. I could use it potentially as a highlighter, although I haven't tried that yet. I want to now. But, you know, it's a great match for me just in terms of getting that super neutral look. On someone with a deeper skin tone, it would be very contrasty. The pigment, though, definitely would stand up to that contrast. Like you would definitely get that saturation, that swipe, that swatch, because it's all mica, it's all reflect. It wouldn't like fade away or not show up or anything. It really is like swiping super metallic pigment onto your skin. So the effect wouldn't be the same on someone with a different skin tone than mine, but I do think that they're usable, like they're equally usable across all skin tones. So now we're getting into some of the questions about wear time. So does it set down or does it stay creamy? This is a question a lot of people have about these because they're cream shadows in pans like this. They set in the pan and get that sort of like waxy seal feeling. It's not like wax rises to the top, but they just, they want to set a little bit, which is good because then when they get onto your eyes, they want to set a little bit too. But you can get them to a more workable texture by digging your finger in, making them more creamy, kind of warming them up a little bit. They get a little melty on your finger, and then you apply them to your lids. And then when they're on the lids, kind of like I was describing about buffing them out with the brush, they want to set down. But at least on me, they never completely fully set to like a sealed over, like the way that the Tarte chrome paints would set or the way that the steel glitters would set, where there's been like the product has completely dried down and it's actually changed, irreversibly changed its texture. Like it's dried and the only thing that's going to happen now is that it will like peel or flake off. I feel like with those steel glitters, like you can't reconstitute them once they're applied. But with these, you can, like you can reconstitute them. They don't dry in a way that doesn't then change again. Like it's not like there's an ingredient that evaporates and leaves behind something different. It's like what you get in what you have in the pan is what you get on your eyes. And that's why they don't dry out. I saw the beauty news girls who I love chatting about this. They had just heard about them. They'd never tried them. And they were saying that they wouldn't want to buy cream shadows in a compact like this because they feel like they have such large collections that wouldn't get rotated in enough. And then, you know, in 6 months or something, they'd open it and it would have dried out and they wouldn't have gotten any good use out of it. But that's not the case with this formula. It doesn't dry out. You could like leave it sitting open on your vanity and it wouldn't change. But that also means that it doesn't change when it's on your eyes. You can, like I was saying, buff it out and get it to as sheer a wash as possible, and that will help it from creasing. But if you put a super thick layer on, like what I like to do, then the warmth of the lid, and for me, I think especially because I have hooded eyes, will cause it to crease where the lid creases. Eventually. It doesn't happen right away, but over the course of the day, it gets a little bit creasy and uneven. It doesn't stay looking on the eyes exactly the way that it looks when you first apply it. You guys who have watched me talk about RÓEN before, you know that the amazing sort of elegance and smeary ne'er-do-well quality of like the looks that I get with these have converted me to creasiness as an aesthetic. Like I love the creasiness. I feel like it makes it look like I couldn't care less, but it looks so good. And so it's been a really interesting journey with this because when I first got the warm quad, I was like, oh my gosh, I really, really hope it doesn't crease. And then when it started to crease, I was like, hey girl, kind of like that, you know? And I still feel that way. I've continued to feel that way. It helps that it's the easiest creasing in the world to fix. Let's see if I've gotten any so far and I can show you. Yeah, a little bit. So I'll give you a close-up demo. So hopefully you could see that. I had a faint line right where my hooded eyes crease over, a faint line where the opening and closing of my eyes had sort of pulled some shadow away and it had like gathered in the crease. And all I had to do was tap over it with my finger, and then it immediately went back. And it doesn't feel like it's immediately going to happen again. It feels pretty close to dry. I just know that it's not completely dry, but it's close enough to dry that it will stick like this for a good while yet. And then if I were out having dinner and I really wanted to be tapping out those creases, I would do it every like 30 to 40 minutes, and you can totally do it without a mirror. That's the other thing I really like about it. And I have been out in public wearing these shadows, you know, not recently, but back in the day when I was wearing them all around town, up and down, that's what I would do. I would just be like, oh, and I would just do it without even having a mirror, and it works seamlessly. So the creasing ended up being something totally unexpected, something I ended up kind of loving, something that's very easy to deal with. But if you cannot brook creasing, if creasing is an absolute no for you, if you can't live with creasing like that, and you don't think that there's a chance that you could be converted to the glamour of it, don't buy these quads, because it's not a formula that sets down like that on the lids, especially if you have hooded eyes. If you've got those like round globules of eyelids that don't fold into themselves when your eyes open, then you'll be fine. They won't crease on you. All right, so before we move on, I really jumped into talking about the other quads and comparing the textures of this quad to the other quads like way earlier in the video than I meant to, according to my list of questions. But I am going to talk more about the compare contrast between the three quads in a moment. But first I want to talk a little bit about like value for money, cost per use, cost per wear. It's kind of an interesting question for me. I mean, I'm trying to answer this question in these reviews objectively, to be like, how much product do you get for what you spend? If you're just looking at like the cost of each pan compared to the cost of each pan of eyeshadows from other brands or other kinds of eyeshadows, the cost is very high, because the quads are $42. That's roughly $10 per eyeshadow, and that's a high-end price. That's luxury. That's like Charlotte Tilbury prices when you're talking about quads. I think Charlotte Tilbury's probably costs more, but you know what I'm saying. It's like if you buy an Urban Decay palette, you know, even if the palette itself costs a little more, you're getting way more shadows, and so you're paying less per exact eyeshadow than you are if you buy this. If you buy this, you're paying about $10 per pan. You know, it's hard to talk about value because some people think that's a lot and some people think that's not a lot. It depends on what kind of makeup you like, how big your collection is, how much money you have, all of this stuff. But if you're just looking out across the palette world, it's a little bit of a premium that you're paying for this comparatively. So I feel like that's the most objective assessment that I can give, in addition to the issue of like the fact that they last a long time. For creams, they're not going to dry out on you because of the way that the formula is. So it's not something where the value is going to be hamstrung by it being something that dries out. Like, I feel like that way about ColourPop actually. The Super Shock shadows and the Jelly Matte shadows, I know that they can be reconstituted, but it's like that detracts from the value. And you won't run into something like that with these. For me personally though, when you talk about value for money with eyeshadow, it's much more complicated than just the question of like how much you're paying for each individual eyeshadow, because the value has to do with how much use I'll get out of it and how much I'll use it in my larger collection. So I have a lot of eyeshadows, a lot of pans of eyeshadow, and I'm not going to use them all up. It's not like a concealer or a primer or something where I have to question the cost per use, because it applies to the question of how long the thing is going to last me. And I want to make sure that I'm not going to run out of it and then have to buy it again and have it add up a lot over time. It's not like that with eyeshadow. I'm not going to run out of my eyeshadow. So value for me has to do with how much I end up loving the product and how much I end up using it. And this Warm Rowan quad, the first one, the one that I bought myself, I've used it more than almost any makeup product that I currently own since I got it. I mean, I've used the butt out of it. Like, I use it almost every day. And now I've moved on to using the cool one a lot as well, trying to get to know it better. But this warm one, the one that I got, it's like the value for money for me has been incredible, because even though it's more expensive than many of the other eyeshadows that I own, I've used it more. And so its value has far surpassed probably the value of almost every other eyeshadow in my collection. That's me personally, but that's all that I can speak to. I think that the value for money could potentially be very high for these if you end up using it as much as I end up using mine. But if it's just gonna be one more thing added onto the top of a huge pile of eyeshadow and you're only gonna use it like once in a blue moon as you rotate through your stuff, then it's $42. It's a lot of money. Okay, let's talk about the three quads together. So I already talked about the textures in detail at the very beginning of the video. I talked about the fact that the textures are different inside each palette, like each one has a range of textures. I'm going to put up on the screen right now swatches of all 3 palettes all together on my arm. When I was swatching these out, the thing that I was the most curious to see was the difference between the deeper sort of browns and smoky shades in these palettes. So I wanted to know if the gunmetal-y, I don't know, it's not even gunmetal-y, it's like a taupey gray lavender shade. I wanted to know how similar it is to the bronzes and browns and gunmetals in the other palettes. It is very different from the warm palette. The browns in the warm palette are rich chocolatey bronzes, one of them being a little bit cooler and one of them being a little bit warmer and more flaky. So it's almost like, compared to them, it looks like a cool toned shade. And then when you look at it next to the shades in the cool quad, which is actually what I was thinking it would be the most like, it comes the closest to duping Meow from the cool quad, but it's so different in its reflex and its undertones. So Meow is definitely more of a brown, or more of a taupe actually. Hashtag in the 1111 palette, it's got those rainbow reflex and it's got that lavender gray undertone. So curiously, I feel like it's more cool toned than the shade in the cool palette. Oh, I really love it. I really love Hashtag. So it's more cool toned than that brown, but it's nowhere near being as blue as the gunmetal shade in the 52 Degrees cool palette, which is actually the one called Meow. The brown one that I was comparing it to before is called Yep. So talking about them just now, I've swatched all 3 of them on the back of my hand, and they're just indubitably 3 different colors. They just are. I think that in the abstract, or if you were just looking at them in the pans, they might seem like they had something in common. But to me, the range is vast. My only other questions about like comparisons and potential dupes were about the pale pink shade in the cool toned quad compared to the pale pink shade in 1111. I kind of addressed that already. They are different in undertone. The one in the cool toned quad is definitely like a peach, and the one in 1111 is a little bit icier. But the thing to me that really sets them apart is the flakiness of the one in the 1111 quad. They could be almost exactly the same color, which they're not. They're different colors. They could be almost exactly the same color, and I would still feel like they're really, really different because the formulas are so different. And then the last thing I was wondering about, FaceTime, the reddish shade, the reddy shade from the warm palette compared to these pinks in 1111. And it's just much browner, right? FaceTime is just, it's like a rust color, and these are pinks. So they've got that readiness if you're looking at them in isolation, especially the slightly deeper one. But when you look at them next to the rust color, you can see that it's like an earth toned browny rust, and you can see how comparatively pink they really are. Not that I was like worried that they were gonna dupe themselves, that RÓEN was gonna like dupe themselves. They only have 3 quads and there's only 4 shadows obviously in each of them. So I think it would have been really strange if they had managed to like dupe a shade just with, you know, that very small selection. But I think that showing the comparisons like that will maybe help you guys. If I know that some of you are kind of like, you think you might want to get one and you're not sure which one would be the best one. My feeling as someone who owns them both, as someone who's been using the warm quad for a really long time, the cool quad for a pretty long time, and the 1111 quad for a week, my feeling is that the warm quad is by far the most neutral. It is just, you saw like the tone of that red, which is the most colorful shade in this quad, but you saw how neutral and brown it looked compared to the pinks in 1111. I feel like people are drawn to 1111 because it has that warm, shimmery pink quality, and it feels like a less risky or an easier to use color story. But I actually think, and this might be me because I'm warm toned, I actually think that 75 Degrees Warm to me is still the most neutral, the easiest to wear. the least ostentatious, not like the other two are ostentatious. I mean, ostentatious is not the word for this formula, but it's just the one that has the most casual glamour of the three. And I think that by a hair or two, it's still my favorite. If I had to give two back, I would keep the warm quad. It's still the one that I like the most. However, I love the 1111 quad so much more than I expected to love it. I just feel like it brings this kind of drama that the other two quads don't. I think it's because of that reflect, but it's also because of like the richness of those pinks, that color. And I can't get enough of that. It's like the RÓEN version of Licked with a watercolor. What is it? Licked with a water. What am I always doing? Licked by a watercolor painting that gave me pink eye. Like before I applied the really shimmery one all over my eyes, you'll have seen in the demo, I basically had the RÓEN version of Licked by a watercolor painting that gave me pink eye, my classic makeup look for which I'm famous on YouTube, right? It was that, but in this formula that I really like. And you can't get that. You cannot get that from the other two quads. You can try with FaceTime, which is that rusty, ruddy color in the warm quad, but it's always going to be really grounded in the earth tones that are the undertones of that shadow. And this really brings that watercolor painting pink eye glam for which I live my life. So I fell for it more than I expected to. And on top of that, you get this incredibly textured, what I think is the disco eye texture shadow in here. Totally didn't expect that either. And on top of that, you get this amazing neutral, glimmery, multicolor shimmer shadow, which is an awesome all over the lid shade. So the thing that I think is really cool about this is that you get those like the pinks, you know what I mean? Like the peaches, the pinks, that kind of neutral eye. You get that wet look from the shimmer. But if you want to do what I consider to be my like most go-to everyday look, which is just like a classic smudged it in with a sooty finger type eye. If you want to do that, you can get that with the 1111 quad by using hashtag, the deepest shade. And you can get something kind of close, slightly different in tone, but kind of close to what I'm always using the warm quad for. And in that way, it's just very versatile. I feel like it might be the most versatile one, or it might be the one that can do the most. And that puts 52 Degrees Cool in third place. For me, it's the hardest one to work with because it's the most colorful. It has this gunmetal with strong blue undertones. It has this purple. I just find that those colors tend to make me look a little more done up than the colors of the other two quads. They clash with my undertones more. And it just means that it's a little bit more of a look, and I tend to have to be a little bit more careful when I'm using this quad. I use it all the time still, and I really, really love it. But in terms of wearability, it's in third place for me. And because of the person that I am, that means that it's also in third place in terms of the order in which I would collect them if I were like having to buy them over again. I would be extremely regretful to have to give back 1111 now that I've been wearing it. And the Cool Quad, I wouldn't want to give it away. I'm not about to give it away, but I would be less regretful to give it back if I had to. One last thing before I start talking about like how I feel about these in the context of my own budget. One tiny thing that has been like getting my goat is that you can't tell the difference between them when they're sitting out there. And I have never been a person who has this problem because I'm not a completionist. I tend to only have one of everything. So when I watch videos and people are like, oh, I can't tell the difference between my Pat McGrath Mothership palettes because they all look the same from the outside, I'm always like, because I don't have even one. And it's just like the problem of having like so many of the same thing that you can't tell the difference between them. I've always felt like it just doesn't apply to me. And now I'm over here being like, oh my God, I can't tell which one it is. I have to open them all to find them. And I understand like now where people are coming from. And I'm also glad that I don't usually have that problem because I don't usually have multiples of anything. So now we're kind of getting into the question of like value for money for me. Like, am I glad that I have all three of these? Am I glad that I've ended up with them? Would I buy 1111 with my own money? Would I buy RÓEN quads with my own money if all my makeup disappeared, etc.? Here are my thoughts. I clearly do not regret buying the warm quad with my own budget. as I have already indicated, I've used it so much since I purchased it that the cost per use has been plummeting over time. The value has been rising as it has emerged as like a star product in my collection. And I would absolutely go back and do that again. I would spend my money on it again. If all my makeup disappeared tomorrow, I would buy it again. The big shocker of this video for me is that I think I would buy 1111 too. I didn't buy it with my budget for this video. I bought it with the budget that my channel has, that I've set aside, like the business budget, so that I could make this video reviewing it. But if for some reason the products that I bought for review with my budget or with my channel budget didn't become mine, like if I didn't have the option to keep them, if I were like gonna automatically give them away or something, I'd spend my own budget to buy 1111. I don't feel like that about the cool RÓEN quad. I'm very grateful that Zane gave it to me. I love using it, and I, again, like since I do have it and I received it as a gift, it's not like I'm lukewarm enough about it to declutter it. But if someone took all three of these away from me, I wouldn't just buy the warm quad back. I'd buy 1111 too, and I wouldn't buy the cool one. I feel like I could live with just two. I was more comfortable with just having two. Honestly, like that's to me like a good number for me. But now since I have all three, because one was a gift and one was a product for review, I'm kind of living my best over here. It's a little bit wacky, but I feel like if there's one product from one brand that I'm going to like collect them all of, then these RÓEN quads, that's it. Because it's like one of my absolute favorite things that I've ever come across in makeup. All right, did I answer all the questions? I'm sitting here staring at my list of questions, but I answered them all. I think I answered them all. If there's something that you want to know that I didn't answer, definitely let me know in the comment section down below. Hopefully I'll see your question and I'll be able to answer it, but it also will help me for future reviews, because if there are things that I like didn't talk about or questions that you would have liked to have answered, that will help inform me when I'm making my list of questions when I'm reviewing products in the future. But I do think that that is it. This was really, really fun. This was a review that I, like I said, I didn't really expect to give. I didn't necessarily want to give. I would say that I didn't have as much like burning excitement to review this product as I did to review the Becca highlighter that I reviewed in the video that went up yesterday. That was one where I was like, oh my gosh, I think it's going to be amazing. Can't wait. This was one where I was like, you know, I think that people really want to see me review this. And I know that I have like a lot of data that I can deliver. So it fits right into the definition of like a product that I wouldn't buy myself with my budget, but that it would be a good idea to review. But crisscross, they ended up being the opposite. Like this ended up being the one that I would have gone back and bought with my budget. And the Becca highlight, in case, should I spoil it if you haven't seen it? It ended up being one that I said that I would have returned if I bought it with my budget. So go figure. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed filming it. And I hope that you are remembering to take extra good care of yourself right now so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.